Well, my name is Sierra Bruggeman. I'm a game producer on the D&D team. And we're here to talk about DMing and getting started with DMing with the new Dungeon Master's Guide. And I have two folks who do not need introductions, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. We have James Wyatt, our principal game designer. And Jeremy Crawford, our game director.
Hello, everyone.
And we're going to get started. We have limited time, and our slides may pop up while we're talking, so pardon that missing. But as I said, we're here to talk about the awesome DMG, which has lots of fun new things. Ooh.
Wow. The two different covers.
Some of the key, most exciting things about the DMG are the resources, all the new resources. We have world building inspiration, brand new artwork. It's easier with D&D Beyond for folks who like to have the digital experience, and it's designed by DMs for DMs.
One of our top priorities in putting together all the advice in this book is just making sure that everything stands the test of use. Like, there's no advice in here that I don't believe in wholeheartedly will actually help make your game better. And we had several DMs as consultants who sort of vetted all of that and offered some opposing viewpoints or additional viewpoints at times that we could flesh the advice out. Because there's no one-size-fits-all solution for every DM. And that's another sort of running theme in the book, is that every DM is unique. Everybody has their own style. Every group of players is unique, and it's going to be different for everybody.
And one of the main focuses of the new Dungeon Master's Guide is helping you, if you are a first-time Dungeon Master, get started. Because we know that even though many of you play, and first off, how many of you play D&D? Marvelous.
Perfect.
Good.
Love it.
And how many of you Dungeon Master? Ooh,
wow,
so many.
I love that.
What do you need us for?
And then how many of you are not currently DMing but hope to become a Dungeon Master? Marvelous.
Yes.
That's what you need us for. Okay.
And so this book, for those of you in that final group who raised your hands, so much of this book is for you. Because we realized that we have, over the years, made Dungeon Master's Guides that were very adept at providing tools for people who already knew how to be a Dungeon Master. What we really wanted to do for the first time is create a Dungeon Master's Guide for everybody else. But don't worry, for all of you experienced DMs, this book is also packed with time savers for you. Because often, even those of us who've been DMing since we were children, I started playing this game when I was 6, even we at times are so strapped for time that we need a buddy, and this book is meant to be that buddy, that will save us time. So whether you are brand new or you have been DMing for decades, this book has something for you.
And we don't just have a book, right? We have a fully redesigned DM screen that comes along with this. And there have been some changes to the back, right?
So with the new Dungeon Master screen, I want to clarify, it doesn't actually come with the book. It's a separate purchase.
Not separate. Yes.
But one of the things, as a Dungeon Master of a certain age, one of the things that I'm most excited about is that I can actually read the text on the inside of the Dungeon Master screen. It is significantly larger than it was before. So all the text in tables and sidebars in our books is bigger now than it was in 2014, but the text in the Dungeon Master screen is even bigger than that. There's also just a funny little user interface thing. We had a team that we worked with primarily on the Player's Handbook, who are specialists in user experience. And one of the things that they observed as they were working with people in the wild, in game stores playing D&D, is that a lot of DMs set up a laptop behind their DM screen, which means that they can't read what's in the two center panels of the DM screen. So it's just a little thing, but we moved the information that you're most likely to use to the outside edges. And the stuff in the middle is stuff that's going to be especially helpful for new DMs, but a super experienced DM won't have to either lift the screen up above the laptop or lower the laptop lid to read what's on it.
Yeah, and it has some incredible art. Jeremy, do you have anything to add in regards to the art or the screen?
Well, the art on the outside of the screen shows a lineup of many different D&D characters, and the characters that you'll see there are all inspired by the character options in the new Player's Handbook. As James mentioned, the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the DM screen all have benefited from the work we did with this user experience group so that we could improve how easy it is for people to find the information that they're looking for. That's one of the reasons why the Player's Handbook has a rules glossary, and the Dungeon Master's Guide has that rules glossary sibling, a lore glossary. Because we realized, again, going along with this theme of making the game more inviting to more people, that it being 50 years old now has a whole lot of lore. And so there are often people who will come to the game who might hear a name like Lolth or Vecna or Tiamat and have no idea who that is. And now, of course, you can Google it, but we wanted to make sure that our rule books actually told you who Tiamat is, who Lolth is, and so many other key characters from the D&D multiverse. So even that is something you have to look forward to in the new Dungeon Master's Guide.
Awesome. Well, let's start diving into the guide. We'll go through some really key experiences. It looks like we don't have a PowerPoint quite yet, but I'll read out the titles of the chapters, and I would love for y'all to tell me, like, in 1, 2, 3 words, the best parts of the chapter.
No, actually, I want this to sink in. What do you think chapter 1 of the Dungeon Master's Guide should be?
How to be a DM.
How to be a DM. Yes, not how to create an entire world. Not to cast shade on to cast shade on the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. So chapter 1 is called The Basics.
Yeah.
And it really is the starting point for, like, what is this game? How do you take the seat behind the screen, and what do you need to get started? And what does that look like in play?
Yeah, and we go from the basics to running the game.
So then that chapter goes deeper on all of the basics. It covers things like what the kinds of activities that different players enjoy, and understanding how different activities appeal to different players. And if you understand your group, you can customize the adventures that you're running to suit those needs. I'm going deeper than a few words into
That's
this,
okay.
but the meat of that chapter is all about the D20 test. Ability checks, saving throws, and attack rolls, how you adjudicate them as a DM, how when your players say they want to do something, your job is to figure out, okay, what happens? And the D20 test is your best tool to do that, and here's how to use all of that. And then there's sections on running exploration, running social interaction, and running combat that sort of add to the rules and give lots of advice for running the 3 pillars of the game.
And that chapter, chapter 2, is really a companion to the Player's Handbook, because that chapter is really showing you as the Dungeon Master how you interface with the rules that are over in that other book. Because, of course, one of the many hats that the Dungeon Master wears is the hat of rules adjudicator, in addition to being a storyteller and often a scheduler and an entertainer and an improv performer and so much more.
Yeah, and then we move to DM's Toolbox.
So chapter 3 is the DM's Toolbox, and Jeremy mentioned that the rules glossary is like the lore glossary, is like a companion to the rules glossary in the Player's Handbook. But the DM's Toolbox is also similar in some ways to the rules glossary, because it is an alphabetical glossary of the rules that might come up as you're playing, like traps. There's a catalog of traps under T in the DM's Toolbox. There's a catalog of hazards under H in the DM's Toolbox. There's a 2-page spread about death under D in the DM's Toolbox that gives advice on things like what to do when a player is rolling death saves, or what to do when the entire party dies.
That's not something that ever happens, right?
And this chapter, the DM's Toolbox, is one of my favorites in the book, precisely because it's filled with these ready-to-use bits for the DM. And as you mentioned, James, it's so easy to find what you're looking for. You know, like, I need to know about poisons. Well, I go to P, and there they are.
The screen is working but flashing now. Next, we have adventures.
The adventures chapter goes into depth, as you would expect, on how to create an adventure. Wow, okay. Visual aids. And then the chapter ends by showing you what we've been telling you all along, by giving you 5 sample adventures that are a half to one whole page that reference the maps and the appendix at the end of the book. We're going to talk more about the adventures in a few minutes.
Yes, we will. We then have campaigns, which ties into adventures.
And like the adventure, in fact, the structure of the campaigns chapter is very similar to the structure of the adventures chapter, because building a campaign is a lot like building an adventure, but bigger. But a big part of this chapter talks about how to hook characters into the world, to make them feel like they're a part of the world, to build the campaign involving their story, to use the knives that the players give you, as my daughter says. I see that as terminology that you have heard as well. My daughter has taught me a lot about the current lingo of D&D. It's awesome. But then, again, the campaigns chapter ends by showing you what we've been telling you all along, by presenting a sample campaign setting. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes. Yeah, years ago when we were first outlining this book, we decided we wanted to do something that had never been done in a Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D before, and that is include a world in the book. Because so often Dungeon Master's Guides have told you about making a world and have told you that there are official worlds, but we thought we need to finally actually put a world in the book. And James is holding up the poster map for the world of Greyhawk. And the world of Greyhawk was the first official world created for Dungeons & Dragons half a century ago. And we thought this is the best time, the 50th anniversary of the game, for us to officially bring Greyhawk back. And not only because it is a part of the game's foundation, going back to its beginning, but also because Greyhawk actually has a very special identity for the game. Not only are many of its most famous adventure locations in that world, places like the Temple of Elemental Evil or the Tomb of Horror, but Greyhawk is also special because it was originally designed for dungeon masters to use it as a canvas to paint on. So other worlds that we have, the Forgotten Realms being the best example of this, are deeply fleshed out. You know, so many books have been published about the Forgotten Realms. Greyhawk, in contrast, its main feature, its main appeal for a dungeon master is that it gives you a broad outline about different parts of the world and then invites you as the dungeon master to fill in the blanks. It's really, in a way, a starter setting. And so we thought this is the perfect way for us to show you not only what a D&D world can look like, but also to give you a start, so that if you're just getting started as a world builder, we provide you with this very lean world that you can just dive right into and make it your own.
The very first published version of the Greyhawk campaign setting was a little 32-page booklet. We've given it almost that much space in this book, probably more words, given difference in typefaces. But there again, it's showing everything that we've already told you elsewhere in the chapter. We talk at the beginning of the chapter about choosing conflicts that are going to define the adventures in your campaign, and then we go to Greyhawk and we list these 3 major conflicts that can drive adventures in this campaign. We talk about starting in a central location and sort of going out from there in decreasing detail, which is exactly what we do with the city of Greyhawk as a starter location, the region around it is a little bit more fleshed out, and then the whole world beyond where you really can do whatever you want with it and tell a whole variety of different kinds of adventure stories. If you want a story of scrappy rebels fighting against an evil empire than the eastern region of the continent where the great kingdom is in decline and various rebel states have separated off from it is your perfect playground. Whereas if you want a merchant intrigue sort of campaign, then go off to the northwest into the Backlanish states. Yeah.
Awesome.
Weeds.
Well, for the sake of time, I'm just going to say there are more chapters. They are cosmology, treasure, bastions, the lore glossary, maps, as well as tracking sheets and the poster map that James held up. And we're going to dive into all of those as we get further into our time together. So next, we're going to go to the basics. So I would like you both to maybe pretend that you're brand new or newish to DMing, and you pick up this book and you start reading those first 2 chapters. How are we actually teaching people in those chapters to be new DMs?
So one way is, if you've seen the new Player's Handbook, you've seen the examples of play in that chapter 1, this sort of dialogue scripts between these 4 players and their dungeon master as they explore combat and exploration and social interaction situations as they're diving into Castle Ravenloft. Sorry, Strahd, who is over there somewhere. So we took that same approach then in chapter 1 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, as the same party of adventurers go on their first adventure, which is one of the adventures that appears in chapter 4, where the difference is we pivot the camera a little bit inside the DM's head, so you can see the thought process that the DM is going through to resolve the actions that the characters are trying to take.
Yeah.
And this book also, as you can see on this slide, goes into basics like how you run a session. It talks about scheduling sessions. Basically, any component of being a dungeon master is touched on here. And I enjoyed reading through the advice. Again, even though I've been doing this since I was a child, it's so informative to see what works for other dungeon masters. And as James mentioned, we consulted with dungeon masters like Matt Mercer, Deborah Ann Wall, and so their perspectives are also represented here.
Awesome. You're saying we found the answer to the ultimate BBEG, which is scheduling?
We have advice for facing that boss.
All
but,
right, great.
I'm not sure that there is a surefire way to defeat that boss at the end.
Yeah, me neither.
I have to say, as a dungeon master, the biggest thing I have done to help scheduling is to delegate that responsibility. I have enough work to do to prep the session, let somebody else figure out when it's actually going to happen.
That's a great idea. All right, next, after the basics, we're going to talk about running the game. And I'm so sorry about the tech problems, y'all. But as we run the game, what resources do we have for DMs? They've read the basics, they understand the fundamentals of being a good DM and how to be a DM, and they're ready to begin to plan a game for a table. What advice do we have for those folks?
Yeah, so I totally skipped the railroad track and started diving into this a few minutes ago. But chapter 2 starts off by talking about player preferences and how to build in elements of your game that appeal to different kinds of different player preferences. Talks about playing with a larger or a smaller group. It talks about what to do if you are in the luxurious position of having more than one dungeon master in your group. How might you trade off? Take turns or do break sessions where a different DM takes over, or share a campaign setting, dividing it up geographically or whatever, or thematically. We talk about narration, and then we go deep into resolving outcomes, where again, we talk about the basic structure of play in the Player's Handbook. The players say what they want to do, the DM adjudicates that, figures out what the result is, and narrates the result of that. And then the players are back to step 1. Okay, well, now what do we do under these changed circumstances? And that's true whether you're in combat. I want to jump out, swing on a chandelier, and come down on that guy's head. Okay, make these checks, and then make an attack roll. Or it's equally true is if I want to go and see what's on that bookshelf, or I want to tell this guy his face is stupid and he should leave us alone. I'm really tired, by the way.
You're doing great. You're doing great. Anything to add, Jeremy?
This chapter also includes advice on using the new approach to initiative that is provided in the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and then you'll also see it in the Monster Manual. And that is, we've taken an optional rule that was in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide and now embraced it. And what we've done is we've now given everything in the game a initiative score. So you now, as a Dungeon Master, have the option of rolling it the traditional way, but you can also, for your monsters, just not roll and have them use the monster's score. And you might even decide to use the player character's scores, and the Player's Handbook tells them how to calculate their scores. So you now have this nice flexibility as a DM of you can sometimes have them roll, or always have them roll, or sometimes, and I know sometimes if I'm planning on running a really big combat encounter and I have many different monsters, it can be super helpful to actually know in advance what the monster's initiative is. And so we've made that super easy for you by putting those initiative scores right into the stat blocks, which you can already see in the creature appendix at the back of the new Player's Handbook.
Incidentally, part of the advice for running a large group is to use initiative scores, because then everybody knows when their turn is coming up, and that can speed up combat a lot.
Great. Well, there's also example adventures in here, which is a great place for a new DM to kick off. And we had the pleasure of running some games last night, and I know you both ran the same adventure from the DMG.
Yeah, one of our big goals throughout this book is always to give you a sample of whatever it is we're talking about. So we talked about the fact that we give you an example world and don't just tell you how to make one. And James, you mentioned earlier that similarly with adventures, we not only give you all the guidance you need to make your own adventures, but we actually give you adventures in this book. But we went further than that. We realized over the last decade, not only as we've played and DM'd 5th edition D&D, but also observed so many others playing and DMing it, that many DMs would put the pressure on themselves to model their homemade adventures on our big books that we write. And that often has led many DMs to feel like the DM preparation is far more onerous than it needed to be. And we have often given advice, whether on YouTube or at conventions, about making your preparation simpler. Here in this book, we really show you how simple it can be, because what we've done with these sample adventures is shown you can plan an entire session of play with less than a full page of text. And James and I each ran one of these half-page adventures last night here at the convention, and we also both demonstrated that we could take the same half-page of text and have it play out in entirely different ways.
Completely different adventures. And I ran it again this morning, and it was different again. And partly that's every group of players is different. So even with the same DM sitting at the table, players, and even with the same player characters, because we were all using pre-generated characters, the characters from the 80s D&D cartoon, players are going to take those in completely different directions and do different things. But really that half page of text plus a map in the back of the book is all you need. And this is carefully edited text, which is more than you need to run your own game.
And leading up to those sample adventures, we also have updated guidance on planning for combat encounters. So we have taken the rules that we had in 2014, and where we could, we have simplified them, and also they are all ready for the new monster manual that comes out in February. And so that the new encounter guidance is all set for when this massive group of monsters comes charging in at the beginning of next year.
If you have ever felt that you built an encounter with, particularly with a larger group of monsters or for higher level characters and it just wasn't challenging enough, we've got you covered.
Yes. And in many ways, we view this current period where the new player's handbook is out and the new Dungeon Master's Guide is coming out, and that means that people are using their 2014 Monster Manual, which is delightful because it shows what we've been talking about, that you can use your 2014 material with the new rules. But a little warning, this is sort of a grace period for everyone's player characters, especially higher level characters, because when the new Monster Manual arrives early next year, those higher challenge rating monsters, many of them are going to be bringing way more power than their 2014 equivalents. Like you will, even when you open up the new Monster Manual next year, you will see that some of those high challenge rating monsters have, in a few cases, hundreds of more hit points than they'd had before. And the amount of damage that they deal is, in many cases, staggering. And again, the encounter building guidelines here are all ready for the hurt that those monsters are going to bring.
Incredible. Well, with these adventures, we also have maps. Maps can be pretty intimidating for new DMs. So how have we set them up for success with these maps?
I hate drawing maps.
Me too.
I always steal maps when I'm preparing an adventure of my own, almost always. When I'm writing an adventure that's going to be published, I do draw my own map. I have to. But so we have an appendix. It's like 15 full-page maps. In the book, they're in black and white, and that is for a specific reason, that these maps should be relatively easy for you to draw onto a battle mat that you've got on your table, for you to scan and edit. So, in fact, we tell you to do that in some of the adventures. Like, you don't need this whole full-page map for this adventure. Just use this corner of it, draw walls in your map, and close it off for a relatively self-contained environment. On D&D Beyond, we will have color versions of these maps that can be loaded into our Maps tool so that they will look pretty on everybody's screen. But for the purposes of this book, they're clear, they're simple, they're easy to use at the table, easy to modify, easy to run with.
And we made sure when selecting what the maps would be that these are all very classic things that almost every DM needs. So you're going to find, dungeons, caves, towns, a ship, castles, all things that I know I as a DM am just going to keep reusing and describing differently, and the players will never know.
And there was a specific theory that went into the creation of these maps of, keeping them simple, right?
Yes. Again, that ability to draw it out on a battle map if you want to. There's not so much detail on these maps so that you decide what's in there. We're not showing you, the coins and the playing cards on the table.
And Sierra, I think part of what you're getting at is that just as we did with those short adventures, we wanted to make sure that these sample maps are not intimidating, because we again and again really want to make it clear, DMing, if you want it to, because for many of us it's a wonderful hobby and we want to pour hours and hours into it, but sometimes we just want to get to the playing and we don't have a whole lot of time that week, and we want to make sure that this book has your back and shows you that whether you're making a thing yourself, there are ways to do it that don't take a ton of time, but then also a lot of the material is pre-made, so that if you don't have time to make the thing at all, well, we've got maps made for you, we have adventures made for you, we have a world made for you, we have a whole city, because on the back side of that world map that James held up, we have the map of the city of Greyhawk that you could use to represent Greyhawk itself, or another fantasy city. So this book is just packed with things for you to essentially go into it as if it were a toy box and grab whatever toy you need that week for your D&D game.
You knew exactly what the next slide was, I think. So we have Greyhawk. So I'm a new DM. I've opened the book. I've learned the basics. I found my table. I've started to craft an adventure to my players' tastes. I am going to use one of these encounters and these adventures, and I picked a map, and now I'm like, well, this is just a one-time thing. I want to run a campaign. How is this grounded into something? And I think Greyhawk offers that perfect opportunity, as you all have mentioned.
And in Greyhawk, because it came into being with the game itself, all of D&D's sort of core assumptions are represented here. So, if you want the classic place where the dwarves are and where the elves are and where the halflings are and so on and so forth, it's all here on this simple map. Also, the landmass represented on the map is relatively small compared to, say, Forgotten Realms or some of our other settings. So also much more manageable for you as a dungeon master if you decide to use this as a jumping off point. Another reason why we chose this as a starting place is this is also the world where many iconic characters are from. So, the Player's Handbook has spells that were created by the likes of Mordenkainen, Bigby, Tasha, Jalarzi, Queen Yolande, and so many others. They're all from this world. And so that's also a fun thing about having Greyhawk in the core books is you not only get to see the names of these characters who have been in D&D since its beginning, but you now again have the world that those characters are from.
And if you're using the sample adventures in Chapter 4, and if you're using the world of Greyhawk, you can combine them perfectly. So the city of Greyhawk, first of all, it details a couple of key locations that adventurers are likely to be drawn to. And for each one, there's a couple of backgrounds associated with it that says basically, if you're a soldier, you might have served in the army with this innkeeper who retired from battle and now runs this inn. So he could be your point of contact in the city. And then the first adventure is set in some of the villages just outside the city of Greyhawk, which are shown on another map. There's a full-page map in the book of the region around the city of Greyhawk where all of these adventures can take place. So you go out from the city to explore these villages and hills and mines and stuff until by the fifth adventure you're venturing into the Feywild and you're off the map entirely.
And the Feywild is a wonderful transition for the next chapter, which is all about the cosmology of the D&D multiverse, because you might decide that you want to start in Greyhawk or visit Greyhawk, but Greyhawk is just one of many worlds in the D&D multiverse, and so that next chapter helps you sort of locate Greyhawk and the Forgotten Realms and Eberron and Dragonlance and Ravenloft in that multiverse, and then also gives you detail on how you travel from the different worlds, how you visit the upper planes and the lower planes, as well as having advice on customizing the D&D cosmology to fit the story of your campaign.
Right. And in that cosmos of D&D, there are some pretty exciting people in the lore glossary. As we mentioned, they're from Greyhawk. We've talked about the lore glossary a little bit. I have a fun question. Is there anyone new or exciting that you were really happy to add to this glossary?
There are several. So the first one that pops into my head is Diane Castra, who is a giant demigoddess who appears as a supporting character in Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants. Her story is not especially well known. She's kind of a fringe second edition D&D character, but we brought her into Bigby's and she makes an appearance in the lore glossary, so you have some context for understanding who are we talking about. Another one is the Prince of Frost, who is gorgeous, who I'm pretty sure was introduced in an adventure in the 4th edition era. And maybe it's because he's gorgeous that he sort of became a fixture in people's minds. But this powerful, evil fae, beautiful fae creature who can mess with your players.
And this lore glossary includes villains and friendly NPCs from throughout the D&D multiverse. So there are certainly luminaries from the world of Greyhawk, but also luminaries from other worlds, and also figures from the outer planes.
And if you look through the pages of the player's handbook and see in the art a character who is named, you should be able to find that character in the lore glossary in the Dungeon Master's Guide to learn a little bit more about who they are.
Great. So we've established our new campaign. I'm a new DM. We've run a couple sessions. We've leveled up to level 5. And now we're ready for our bastion.
When I get home on Tuesday, my daughter's running her campaign. We're going to hit level 5 after we clear all the monsters out of a ruined city, which should be no problem at all. And we're going to build our bastions there.
And how many of you are familiar with what the new bastion system is? So we previewed bastions in our Unearthed Arcana series online, and bastions are really a way for the Dungeon Master to invite players into essentially creating a home base. And we've also taken a number of the rules that in the 2014 rule books were categorized as downtime activities and moved those into this concept of a bastion, your home. This is a place in the world where you not only have your stuff, but also you can have NPCs who are your friends, possibly family members, and this is really a place for you to start making a home for your character, and also potentially to have your bastion combine with the other characters' bastions. Each bastion can have special facilities that you add to it, like an arcane library or a laboratory or a garden or a theater, and so much more. And each of those special facilities unlocks special abilities for your character. Some of those abilities are things that happen at the bastion while you're off adventuring. Like you might come back from your adventure and find that the NPCs there have made a magic item for you. But they also sometimes, those facilities can even give your character temporary special abilities in the form of supernatural gifts that will then benefit them when they then leave home to go back out on adventures.
So for those of you who are regular players but are somewhat DM curious, a bastion is sort of a fascinating way to explore the creative part of being a dungeon master. You've got this place. This is a little part of the world that's yours to play with. You're creating the NPCs that inhabit this bastion. You're narrating the stories that unfold there while your character is off doing other things. So you really get a chance to make your creative stamp on the world that you all are creating together, and maybe dip your toe into what it's like to be a dungeon master and get even more curious.
And the bastions are eminently customizable. We've created them so that you as the player, if first you as the dungeon master have decided your players get to have bastions, and I encourage you to let them play in this sandbox, there are special facilities that are available to all characters at different levels to choose from. It's a big menu of options as you're looking at how to customize your home base. But then there are also special facilities that are available only to characters who meet certain prerequisites. And we did this to really help you bring your character's class fantasy to your bastion. So if you're a spellcaster, there are certain options available only to you as a spellcaster. Similarly, if you're a more sort of weapon-focused character, there are some options available only to you, so that a wizard's bastion can develop in ways distinct from how a fighter's bastion develops. I mentioned also that some of the facility options can produce magic items. And magic items, that's a part of the book we haven't touched on. And
Let's
in fact,
talk about it, yeah.
It is, in fact, the biggest chapter in the book because we have brought back the truckloads of magic items from the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. They have been enhanced, they've been revised, but we've also brought to the book many new magic items. So you're going to find in this book more common magic items, useful for lower level characters, but also we have some higher rarity magic items that are new to this book, including, finally, for the first time in a Dungeon Master's Guide, the magic items wielded by the kids in the 1980s Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. So for the first time ever, if you want Presto's hat, or Hank's bow, or Diana's staff, or any of the other items that those kids had, those are now here in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
And we can craft our own magic items, right?
We can, and that's one of the things I was going to say about bastions as well as the magic items chapter. So the Player's Handbook introduced new rules for crafting mundane items, for making your own potions of healing and spell scrolls. The Dungeon Master's Guide expands that.
And expands on it and is a companion to it. So if you've seen the new Player's Handbook and the new crafting rules, you see that those rules now really give your tools a job. One of the things we addressed in the new Player's Handbook was making it so that your tool proficiencies had more of a role to play for your character. Well, you're going to see that theme continued in the Dungeon Master's Guide because certain tool proficiencies are connected to making certain types of magic items. And so we basically continue to reward your character building choices even here in the new Dungeon Master's Guide.
And that is our time together. Thank you all for putting up with our technical difficulties.
We might be
so
lacking
much.
a tool proficiency or two.